For most of human history, the sea was not a place of beauty but of mystery and fear. Long before satellites, sonar, or deep-sea cameras, sailors crossed endless dark waters with only the stars above and imagination below. In those depths, something vast seemed to move. Shadows passed beneath ships. Waves rose without warning. Entire vessels vanished without explanation. Ancient people did not believe the ocean was empty. They believed it was alive, watched over by enormous creatures older than memory itself. Sea monsters were not legends whispered for entertainment. They were considered real forces of nature, recorded in maps, journals, and sacred texts. Tonight we drift back into those ancient beliefs, exploring the sea monsters that humanity once accepted as undeniable truth. Read us slowly and let the stories carry you across the quiet waters of the past. If you enjoy slow history, ancient mysteries, and stories meant to help you rest, consider subscribing to the channel. New calm journeys through the past are always waiting for you here. For much of human history, the world did not feel open and endless. It felt small, fragile, and surrounded by darkness. The land people knew was familiar and safe, shaped by paths, seasons, and stories passed from one generation to the next. But beyond the coastline, where solid ground gave way to restless water, certainty dissolved. The sea stretched outward until it met the horizon, and beyond that line, no one could say with confidence what waited. It was there, at the farthest edges of human knowledge, that ancient maps placed their most unsettling images. Vast serpents, horned beasts, coiling shadows, and enormous creatures with eyes as large as shields. These were not decorations meant to entertain. They were warnings. Early mapmakers were not only recording geography, they were capturing the limits of understanding. Each map was a fragile balance between what had been seen, what had been rumored, and what had been feared. Coastlines were drawn carefully where traders sailed often, ports were marked where people lived and exchanged goods, and rivers were traced where travelers had walked. But as the ink moved farther from familiar shores, the lines grew uncertain. Lands grew uncertain. Water expanded into emptiness, and into that emptiness, artists and scribes filled the unknown with monsters. The edge of the known world was not simply a place on paper. It was a psychological boundary. Beyond it lay everything humanity could not explain. Storms that appeared without warning, waves tall enough to swallow ships whole, and depths so dark they seemed bottomless. Sailors returned with stories of shadows moving beneath their vessels, of massive forms breaking the surface only briefly before disappearing again. Without scientific language to describe whales, giant squids, or optical illusions caused by fog and exhaustion, the mind reached for something older and more powerful. Myth. Sea monsters on ancient maps served a practical purpose. They told sailors where caution was needed. A serpent drawn near a stretch of ocean was a visual shorthand for danger, unpredictable currents, frequent storms, or waters where ships often vanished. Long before written warnings could be read by everyone, images spoke directly to fear. A single glance at a coiling beast was enough to communicate, "Do not sail here lightly." These images also reflected the way ancient people understood knowledge itself. Knowledge was not infinite. It was something earned slowly, step by step, voyage by voyage. What had not been proven through experience was not dismissed. It was respected, even feared. The unknown was not empty. It was alive with possibility, and possibility often took the shape of monsters. Many medieval European maps, especially Mappa Mundi, were not meant to be navigational tools in the modern sense. They were symbolic representations of the world, as people believed it to be. Jerusalem might sit at the center, paradise might be drawn at the eastern edge, and the oceans surrounding everything were filled with creatures both wondrous and terrifying. Sea monsters shared space with spiritual symbols, suggesting that the physical and the supernatural were inseparable. To sail far from shore was not just a physical journey, it was a moral and existential one. The phrase often associated with these maps, "Here be dragons," captures the spirit of the era, even if the exact wording was rare. Familiar logic no longer applies. Dragons, serpents, and monstrous fish represented chaos at the margins of order. They reminded viewers that humanity's control over the world was limited and fragile. For sailors, these beliefs were not abstract. Imagine standing on the deck of a wooden ship, days or weeks from land, surrounded by nothing but water and sky. At night, the sea became a black mirror, reflecting stars that seemed cold and distant. Strange sounds echoed through the hull. Sometimes the water glowed faintly with bioluminescence, lighting up shapes that vanished as quickly as they appeared. In such moments, the idea of enormous creatures lurking below did not feel foolish. It felt logical. Maps reinforced these fears. A sailor who had seen a monstrous imaging to the edge of a chart would remember it when the wind died and the ship drifted in silence. Ancient cultures across the world shared this instinct to place monsters at the boundaries of knowledge. Norse maps and sagas spoke of colossal sea serpents encircling the world, so large they could bite their own tails. These creatures defined the limits of existence itself. In Greek thought, the outer seas were home to Scylla and Charybdis, dangers so absolute they became metaphors for impossible choices. In Asian traditions, vast sea dragons controlled storms and tides, dwelling in deep palaces beyond human reach. Though the forms differed, the message was the same. The edge of the world was not empty. It was guarded. As exploration expanded, the monsters did not disappear immediately. Instead, they moved. When coastlines became better known, the beasts were pushed farther out, retreating into still, unexplored waters. This gradual migration mirrors the way fear responds to knowledge. What is understood loses its power to terrify. But fear does not vanish. It simply relocates. Even as navigation improved and maps became more accurate, artists continued to include sea monsters, sometimes out of tradition, sometimes out of belief, and sometimes out of respect for the stories of sailors who insisted they had seen something extraordinary. These later monsters often appeared more detailed, more anatomically complex, blending observation with imagination. A whale might be drawn with exaggerated teeth. A giant squid might be given a monstrous face. Reality and myth overlapped in the ink. There is also a quiet humility embedded in these maps. By acknowledging the unknown, ancient mapmakers admitted the limits of human understanding. Modern maps strive for completeness, for precision down to the smallest detail. Ancient maps, by contrast, were honest about uncertainty. The monsters were symbols of that honesty. They said, "We do not know what lies here, and that not knowing matters." Fear itself played a role in shaping these representations. Fear sharpened memory. A sailor who survived a storm would remember it vividly. And when retelling the story, the danger might grow in size and intensity. Over time, these stories layered upon one another, creating creatures that embodied many different experiences at once. A single monster might represent storms, shipwrecks, drowning, and the terror of being lost, all combined into one image. The edge of the known world was also the edge of human ambition. It tempted explorers even as it warned them away. The same map that showed a monstrous serpent might inspire someone to prove it wrong, to sail beyond the warning and return with knowledge. In this way, monsters indirectly fueled exploration. They marked the challenge. As centuries passed and the world became more thoroughly charted, the monsters slowly faded from maps. The ocean was still dangerous, but danger could now be explained through winds, currents, and weather patterns. Creatures once thought mythical were identified as whales, sharks, or giant squids. The unknown shrank. Yet something was lost along with the monsters. Those images carried a sense of wonder and respect for the vastness of the world. They reminded viewers that humanity was small, that nature was powerful, and that certainty was rare. Modern maps may be accurate, but they are quiet. They do not whisper warnings or tell stories. Even today, the ocean remains largely unexplored. We know more than ancient map makers ever did, but not everything. Vast regions of the deep sea have never been seen by human eyes. Strange creatures still rise from darkness, unfamiliar and unsettling. In this sense, the edge of the known world has not disappeared. It has simply moved deeper. The sea monsters of ancient maps were not foolish mistakes. They were expressions of a worldview that understood the importance of humility. They acknowledged mystery rather than denying it. They accepted that knowledge has boundaries and that beyond those boundaries lies something powerful and unpredictable. When we look at those old charts now, with their curling beasts and watchful eyes, we are not just seeing outdated beliefs. We are seeing humanity's relationship with the unknown, carefully drawn in ink. We are seeing fear, curiosity, reverence, and imagination sharing the same space. The monsters mark where certainty ends and awe begins. And perhaps that is why they still captivate us. In a world mapped and measured, we are drawn to reminders that not everything can be known. The edge of the known world, once filled with sea monsters, still exists within us, in the quiet understanding that beyond our knowledge, something vast is always waiting. For much of human history, the world did not feel open and endless. It felt contained, fragile, and surrounded by vast uncertainty. The land people knew was shaped by repetition. The same roads walked each day, the same fields planted each season, the same skies watched from familiar doorways. Knowledge grew slowly, bound to memory and experience. But beyond the coastline where earth dissolved into moving water, the rules changed. The sea was not stable. It shifted constantly, reflecting light one moment and swallowing it the next. At the horizon, it met the sky in a thin, trembling line, and beyond that line, nothing could be confirmed. Early civilizations understood the ocean as a boundary, not a pathway. It marked the end of what could be safely understood. Fishing boats to shore. Trade vessels followed known currents and coastlines. To drift too far outward meant leaving the realm of certainty and entering a space governed by chance, weather, and forces unseen. When ancient mapmakers attempted to capture the world on parchment, they were not merely charting land and water. They were translating human confidence and human fear into ink. Maps were fragile objects, created slowly by hand, each one influenced by the knowledge and beliefs of its time. A coastline existed on a map because someone had walked it, sailed alongside it, or heard consistent reports from those who had. Where stories conflicted or ended, the mapmaker faced a choice: leave the space empty or fill it with meaning. Emptiness suggested ignorance. Meaning, even frightening meaning, felt more honest. This is where sea monsters emerged. At the edges of the known world, where confirmed routes ended, monstrous shapes appeared. Long serpents twisted through waves. Enormous fish with exaggerated teeth opened wide mouths. Creatures with horns, claws, and staring eyes floated just beyond the reach of familiar waters. These images were not added casually. They carried weight. They warned, instructed, and reflected collective belief. To the modern eye, such illustrations may appear decorative or imaginative, but to the people who relied on these maps, they were deeply serious. A monster drawn near a stretch of ocean implied danger, violent storms, unpredictable currents, or places where ships failed to return. The monster became a visual summary of risk. Understood even by those who could not read words, the ocean itself offered endless reinforcement for these fears. Storms could rise suddenly, transforming calm water into chaos within moments. Waves climbed higher than buildings, crashing down with overwhelming force. Wooden ships groaned and flexed, sounding almost alive in the darkness. Sailors, exhausted and half awake, witnessed shadows moving beneath the surface, large shapes gliding just out of view. In low light and heavy mist, size and distance became impossible to judge. A whale surfacing close to a ship could seem enormous beyond reason. A line of waves might resemble the coils of a serpent. Once seen, such images lingered in the mind. When sailors returned home, they told stories. These stories were not fabrications meant to deceive. They were attempts to describe experiences that defied explanation. Language struggled to capture scale and motion in a featureless environment like the open sea. So the mind reached for familiar symbols, beasts, monsters, guardians of forbidden places. Over time, individual accounts merged into shared imagery, repeated and refined with each retelling. Map makers listened. Ancient and medieval maps were not scientific documents in the modern sense. They were repositories of collective knowledge, blending observation, rumor, belief, and tradition. A monster placed at the margin of a map represented everything uncertain about that region. It said if people have gone here, and something frightening was encountered, or something prevented their return. These boundaries mattered deeply. The edge of the known world was where order gave way to chaos. Inside the boundary, things had names. Outside it, names failed. Monsters became placeholders for the unnameable. In many European mappa mundi, the ocean encircled the known lands like a vast ring, separating the human world from the unknown. Along this ring, creatures swam endlessly. Some were labeled. Others were left to speak for themselves through image alone. These monsters did not exist in isolation. They shared space with spiritual symbols, legendary lands, and religious narratives. The physical and the mythical blended seamlessly, reflecting a worldview in which the universe was layered and meaning was everywhere. The placement of monsters also reinforced humility. They reminded viewers that humanity's reach was limited. No matter how powerful a kingdom or how skilled its sailors, there were places where human control ended. This acknowledgement of limitation was not weakness. It was wisdom shaped by survival. The famous idea summarized as "here be dragons" captures this attitude perfectly. Whether or not the exact phrase appeared often, the sentiment was universal. Beyond this point, knowledge ends. Proceed with caution. The dragon or sea serpent did not need to be real in a physical sense to be effective. It represented real danger. For sailors, these warnings followed them long after the map was folded away. On open water, memory and imagination filled the silence. At night, when the horizon vanished and the ship seemed suspended in darkness, every sound took on significance. The slap of waves against the hull became rhythmic, almost like breathing. The creak of timber echoed through the deck. Sometimes the water glowed faintly, disturbed by the ship's movement, lighting up swirling patterns beneath the surface. In those moments, it was easy to believe something vast was watching. Different cultures expressed these fears in different forms, yet the pattern remained the same. In Norse tradition, enormous serpents were said to encircle the world itself, holding it together, even as they threatened to crush it. These creatures defined the ultimate boundary, the limit of existence. In Greek thought, the outer seas were haunted by monsters that tested heroes and punished arrogance. To sail too far was not only dangerous, but morally significant. In Asian traditions, powerful sea dragons controlled rain, storms, and tides, dwelling in palaces beneath the waves, far beyond human reach. Though these creatures varied in shape and personality, they served the same function. They guarded the unknown. As exploration slowly expanded, the edges of the known world shifted. Coastlines once thought endless were mapped and named. Islands emerged where monsters had once been drawn. But the creatures did not disappear entirely. They moved outward, pushed farther into the remaining blank spaces. Each new discovery narrowed the zone of fear, but never eliminated it. This gradual retreat of monsters reveals something fundamental about human psychology. Fear does not vanish with knowledge, it adapts. When one mystery is solved, another takes its place. Ancient maps show this process visually, with monsters retreating step by step into the margins. Even in later periods, when navigation improved and scientific thinking began to reshape understanding, sea monsters remained on maps. Sometimes they were included, out of tradition. Sometimes they were added to appeal to buyers who expected them. And sometimes they reflected genuine belief, sustained by sailors who continued to report encounters with enormous creatures. These later illustrations often became more detailed. Artists studied real animals and exaggerated their features. Whales grew teeth, squids gained expressive eyes, sharks became larger and more aggressive. Reality and imagination blended until they were nearly indistinguishable. There is a quiet honesty in this approach. Instead of pretending complete understanding, mapmakers acknowledged uncertainty. The monsters were admissions of ignorance, drawn openly rather than hidden. They declared that the world was larger than human knowledge. Fear played a central role in shaping these images. Fear sharpens memory and it exaggerates perception. A near shipwreck becomes a monstrous attack. A powerful storm becomes a living force. Over time, these experiences accumulate, forming creatures that embody many dangers at once. A single sea monster might represent storms, drowning, isolation, and death, all combined into one form. Yet the edge of the known world was not only feared, it was also irresistible. Those same monsters that warned sailors away also tempted explorers forward. They marked the challenge. To sail beyond the warning was to confront the unknown directly, to return with stories or not return at all. In this way, monsters indirectly fueled discovery. As centuries passed and the globe became more thoroughly charted, monsters slowly faded from maps. Scientific explanations replaced symbolic ones. Storms were understood through meteorology. Currents were mapped. Creatures once thought mythical were identified, classified, and studied. The ocean became measurable. But something was lost along with the monsters. Those old maps carried a sense of wonder that modern charts rarely evoke. They acknowledged mystery instead of erasing it. They respected nature's power and humanity's smallness. Today's maps are precise and silent. They do not whisper warnings. They do not tell stories. They do not remind us to be afraid. And yet, the ocean remains largely unexplored. Vast regions of the deep sea have never been seen by human eyes. New species are discovered regularly. Many of them strange enough to resemble the monsters of old. The pressure, darkness, and isolation of the deep still defy easy understanding. In this sense, the edge of the known world has not vanished. It has simply moved downward into places light cannot reach. The sea monsters of ancient maps were not foolish errors. They were symbols of humility, imagination, and respect for the unknown. They expressed a worldview that accepted mystery as a permanent part of existence. They taught caution, inspired awe, and reminded humanity of its limits. When we look at these maps now, with their curling beasts and watchful eyes, we are seeing more than outdated beliefs. We are seeing humanity's relationship with uncertainty, carefully drawn in ink. We are seeing fear and curiosity sharing the same space. We are seeing the moment where knowledge ends and imagination begins. Perhaps this is why these images continue to captivate us. Even in a world mapped and measured, something within us longs for the unknown. The edge of the known world still exists, not only in unexplored depths, but within the human mind itself. And beyond that edge, as ancient mapmakers understood so well, something vast will always be waiting. For sailors of the northern seas, the ocean was never an empty expanse of water. It was a living presence, cold and heavy, breathing beneath their ships. The farther north they traveled, the darker the waters became both in color and in reputation. Fog settled low and thick, blurring the line between sea and sky. The sun, when it appeared, lingered briefly before sinking again toward the horizon. In these regions where daylight could vanish for months and storms rose without warning, sailors spoke in quiet voices about a creature so immense that it reshaped their understanding of the ocean itself. They called it the Kraken. The Kraken was not imagined as a fast or furious monster. It did not chase ships or roar above the waves. Its terror came from its size and its stillness. Sailors believed it could rest beneath the surface for years, unmoving, unnoticed, until one day a ship would drift above it and mistake its vast back for solid land. Crews would lower anchors, thinking they had found a small island or reef. Some would even climb onto its surface, unaware that beneath their feet lay living flesh. And then slowly, the sea would begin to change. The water around the island would start to churn. The surface would sink. Waves would form where none had existed before. By the time sailors realized their mistake, it was already too late. The Kraken would awaken, its enormous body descending back into the depth, dragging ships, anchors, and men down with it. No sudden violence, no dramatic struggle. Just an unstoppable pull into darkness. These stories were not whispered by inexperienced dreamers. They were told by hardened sailors who had crossed dangerous waters many times and survived. Their accounts were consistent enough to form a shared image. A creature so large it distorted the sea itself, so powerful it altered currents, and so ancient it seemed more like a force of nature than an animal. In the North Atlantic, where cold waters conceal vast and unfamiliar life, the idea of such a being felt plausible. The sea there behaves differently. Waves are heavier. Depths drop away suddenly. Storms form quickly and with little warning. Ships could vanish without debris, swallowed whole by conditions no one could explain. The Kraken became a way to give shape to these disappearances. Early descriptions of the Kraken often emphasized its size above all else. Some accounts claimed it was miles wide. Others said its arms could encircle entire ships. Many described its presence indirectly, through the effects it had on the surrounding sea. When the Kraken surfaced, fish were said to gather in great numbers, drawn toward it. Sailors who noticed unusually abundant fishing in one area sometimes feared they were near the creature. Too much life, they believed, could signal something far more dangerous beneath. This belief reveals something important about how the Kraken was understood. It was not merely a monster that attacked ships. It was part of the ocean's hidden structure. Its movements influenced tides. Its breathing stirred currents. Its feeding created patterns fishermen could observe. In this way, the Kraken was imagined less as an intruder and more as a resident, a permanent inhabitant of the deep. The idea that a creature could be mistaken for an island speaks to the sheer scale people attributed to it. In an age when most sailors had never seen land beyond familiar coastlines, islands themselves felt uncertain. Rocks appeared and vanished with tides. Fog reshaped distances. A dark mass on the horizon could be anything. To step onto what seemed like land and feel it slowly sink beneath. Sailors spent weeks staring at water, learning its moods intimately. When something behaved differently, when the sea seemed too calm or currents moved against expectation, it demanded explanation. The Kraken became that explanation. Maps of northern waters reflected this belief. In regions beyond regular trade routes, artists drew massive creatures lurking just beneath the surface. These illustrations often showed only part of the Kraken. A curve of its back, a cluster of tentacles, or a vast eye peering upward. The implication was clear: most of the creature remained hidden, too large to be fully captured on paper. The Kraken's power was not described as aggressive, but inevitable. Once caught in its influence, escape was unlikely. Ships did not battle it. They were simply drawn down. This made the Kraken especially frightening. There was no heroism to be found in such encounters. Strength and skill offered little protection. Survival depended on chance and distance. This quality aligned the Kraken with the northern seas themselves. These waters were not cruel, but they were indifferent. They did not punish or reward. They simply existed according to their own rules. The Kraken embodied this indifference. It did not hunt sailors out of malice. It rose and sank as it always had, and humans who crossed its path suffered the consequences. Over time, scholars and naturalists attempted to reconcile these stories with emerging knowledge. Some suggested the Kraken was a giant octopus or squid, creatures whose existence was once doubted but later confirmed. Giant squids, when eventually documented, only strengthened belief in earlier accounts. If such enormous animals truly lived in the deep, what else might remain unseen? Others believed the Kraken was a misunderstanding of underwater geological features. Volcanic activity, rising gas, or shifting currents could create the illusion of land where none existed. A ship anchored over such a feature might indeed be pulled downward as water displaced beneath it. To those who experienced it, the explanation mattered less than the terror itself, yet reducing the Kraken to misinterpretation misses its deeper role. The Kraken was not simply an error in observation. It was a symbol shaped by environment, experience, and fear. It represented the ultimate vulnerability of sailors, the knowledge that no matter how carefully they navigated, the sea itself could betray them. The northern seas were especially suited to this kind of belief. Their depths are among the least explored even today. Light fades quickly. Pressure increases. Sounds travel strangely. In such conditions, enormous creatures could hide easily. Imagination filled the darkness with forms that matched the scale of the unknown. Sailors spoke of whirlpools forming where the Kraken fed, capable of dragging ships into spinning water. Whether caused by currents, tides, or storms, these phenomena were real enough to destroy vessels. Attributing them to a single creature made sense. It offered a narrative where chaos could be understood, even if not controlled. The Kraken also served as a warning passed from one generation to the next. Young sailors learned to respect certain waters, to avoid anchoring in unfamiliar places, to watch for unusual changes in the sea. The monster story reinforced caution. In this way, fear became a form of knowledge. As centuries passed, the image of the kraken evolved. In some tellings, it gained more defined features: long arms, suction cups, enormous eyes. In others, it remained a vast, shapeless mass, more environment than animal. This flexibility allowed the kraken to survive changing beliefs. It adapted as understanding grew. Even as scientific exploration advanced, reports of massive creatures continued. Fishermen occasionally brought up strange limbs in their nets. Whaling ships described encounters with enormous squids battling whales in the depths. Each new account breathed life into older stories. The kraken retreated deeper but never vanished. The idea of mistaking a creature for an island is especially telling. It speaks to humanity's desire for stability in an unstable world. Land represents safety, rest, and certainty. To discover that what you believed was solid ground is actually alive and sinking strikes at something fundamental. It turns safety into threat and certainty into illusion. This theme resonates beyond the sea. The kraken reminds us that appearances can deceive, that the foundations we trust may not be as firm as they seem. For sailors whose lives depended on reading the environment correctly, this lesson was painfully relevant. Modern science may dismiss the kraken as legend, but it does not erase the conditions that gave rise to it. The ocean remains vast and largely unexplored. Giant creatures still surface unexpectedly, startling those who encounter them. Ships still vanish. The sea still behaves in ways that resist easy explanation. The kraken endures because it expresses a truth deeper than literal existence. It captures the feeling of confronting something immeasurably larger than oneself. It embodies the helplessness of being drawn into forces beyond control. It gives a face to the fear that arises when the unknown moves beneath you. In the quiet moments at sea, when the water lies unnaturally still and the horizon dissolves into mist, it is easy to understand why sailors believed. The kraken did not need to be seen clearly to be real in their minds. Its presence was felt in the weight of the ocean, in the slow pull of currents, in the silence that followed a vanished ship. And so the stories persisted. They traveled from deck to deck, from port to port, from map to map. The kraken became part of the northern seas themselves, as enduring as the cold, as deep as the water, as patient as the darkness below. Even now, when we look out over those waters, knowing what science has revealed and what still remains hidden, the idea does not entirely fade. Somewhere beneath the surface, beyond light and reach, the sea keeps its secrets. And in that darkness, the kraken continues to sleep. For centuries, the ocean has been both a source of life and a realm of fear. It stretches beyond sight, dark and endless, hiding its depths beneath shifting waves. To those who traveled its vastness, the sea was never empty. Beneath the surface, unseen, things moved with a slow, deliberate patience that human eyes could rarely capture. Among the many creatures whispered about in sailor tales across the world, none inspired as much awe and quiet terror as the serpents of the deep. Long, coiling, immense, these sea serpents were said to rise silently alongside ships, gliding through the water with a grace and stillness that made them almost invisible until they were too close to ignore. The stories of these serpents stretch from the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the tropical waters of Southeast Asia. Each culture shaped its version, yet there was a shared understanding. These were not ordinary creatures. They were ancient, vast, and deeply entwined with the rhythms of the ocean. To encounter one was to confront a force older than most human settlements, a being that existed in the liminal space between myth and reality. Sailors spoke of them with quiet respect, often choosing their words carefully, as though naming them too plainly might draw their attention. In the northern seas, where waters are cold and dark, serpents were described as stretching for hundreds of feet, their bodies thick enough to disturb the surface without breaking it entirely. Sailors reported seeing long coils rise alongside the hulls of their ships, moving in perfect synchronization with the waves. Sometimes only a single arc would appear above water. At other times, a twisting, writhing form seemed to stretch into infinity. To those aboard, the impression was terrifying and beautiful at once. The serpents were too large to fear in the same way one fears a shark or a whale. The sea serpents became a focal point for this collective attention, a creature whose slow approach mirrored the patience required of sailors to survive. Some accounts describe serpents interacting with the environment in ways that suggested intelligence. They were said to circle ships deliberately, sometimes creating protective currents that kept storms at bay, at other times stirring waves in ways that complicated navigation. Notice changes in fish behavior when serpents were nearby, and some cultures believed that the creatures could influence the weather, summoning fog or shifting winds. And the line between natural phenomenon and conscious action was blurred, making the serpents appear not only immense but sentient. The serpents were often associated with omens. In Scandinavian tales, their appearance could signal impending storms or significant events. In Asian narratives, encountering a serpent was sometimes seen as a blessing or a warning, depending on how the creature presented itself. Sailors in coastal communities alike developed rituals and practices intended to respect or placate these beings. Offerings were sometimes made and certain waters were avoided at particular times of year. These behaviors reflected a deep-seated understanding of human vulnerability in the face of forces much larger than themselves. Generations of stories reinforced the reality of the serpents. Fathers told sons, captains told crews, chroniclers recorded accounts, and each retelling added layers of detail and consistency. Over time, a collective memory formed that spanned continents. From the icy northern fjords to tropical bays and archipelagos, sailors described remarkably similar creatures, long, coiling, silent, moving alongside human vessels with awareness and patience. This consistency lent credibility, making the serpents not just myths but shared cultural touchstones that anchored a human understanding of the ocean's mysteries. Even the movements of other sea life were interpreted in relation to the serpents. Fish schools, pods of whales, and flocks of seabirds were said to behave differently when serpents were near. A sudden scattering of fish or an unusual pattern in the waves could be a warning. Sailors developed a sort of instinctive awareness, reading these signs as carefully as they read the wind or the stars. The serpents, in a sense, became part of the navigational knowledge passed down through generations, blending observation, experience, and legend into a single framework for understanding the sea. Scientific explanations emerged gradually. Biologists eventually identified large eels, giant squids, and other deep-sea creatures whose existence mirrored some of the earlier descriptions. Observations of oarfish, with their long, undulating bodies and almost serpentine movement, provided further confirmation that the stories were not entirely fanciful. However, no single species accounts for all tales of the deep-sea serpents, leaving room for imagination and mystery. The lack of complete knowledge about the ocean's depths allowed the legends to persist, their scale and behavior exceeding the limits of modern biology. The serpent's immense length also contributed to their mystique. Reports often describe creatures extending hundreds of feet, coiling through the water in patterns that made their full size nearly impossible to comprehend. Witnesses emphasized the slow, undulating movement, the way the serpent seemed to glide with minimal effort, and the silent power that moved beneath the waves. There was a hypnotic quality to observing such a being, a sense of smallness and awe that lingered long after the sighting. In addition to individual encounters, collective sightings reinforced belief. Entire crews would describe the same phenomena independently. Shadows moving below the ship, ripples forming without wind, shapes rising alongside the hull, the subtle tug of currents in unusual directions. These accounts, repeated and cross-checked over time, became the foundation of the serpent's reputation as real, formidable inhabitants of the deep. Beyond fear and respect, the serpent symbolized humanity's relationship with the unknown. The ocean is vast and largely unexplored, even today, and it remains a space where imagination and reality coexist. The long, coiling serpents represent not only the unseen creatures that inhabit the depths, but also the limits of human perception and knowledge. Their silent presence alongside ships reminds us of the patience and humility required to traverse a world larger than ourselves. The serpents of the deep were also a measure of time. Sailors spoke of them moving slowly, rising and sinking with the tide, appearing for brief moments before vanishing beneath waves. Observing them required stillness, attention, and respect. They were as much a part of the ocean's rhythm as the currents, the winds, and the stars. Even when maps and chronicles sought to record them, the serpents remained elusive. Illustrators often depicted only portions: a head emerging from water, a twist of body curling alongside a ship, a hint of scales catching the light. The full length and shape were left to imagination. This partial depiction enhanced their terror and fascination, suggesting that what could not be seen was always greater than what could be observed. Sailors' encounters with these serpents were sometimes linked to extreme weather events. A sudden storm, a rogue wave, or a mysterious fog might be attributed to the presence of a great serpent beneath the water. These interpretations reinforced caution and respect. The creatures became teachers, reminding humans of their limitations and the unpredictable power of the ocean. As centuries passed, the serpents did not disappear. Modern deep-sea exploration has revealed creatures that resemble ancient accounts in part, but much of the ocean remains unexplored. The possibility of unknown species lurking in abyssal depths keeps the legend alive. Scientific knowledge may reduce some of the mystery, but it cannot erase the experience of observing something immense moving silently beside a ship, something that dwarfs human perception and imagination alike. The serpent's slow, deliberate movement has also been interpreted as a lesson in patience. They are not aggressive in the way predators are. They wait, observe, and move according to rhythms beyond human comprehension. This patience mirrors the quiet endurance required of sailors navigating dangerous, unfamiliar waters. Survival depends on respect, observation, and understanding, not force. Even today, the serpents of the deep hold a place in human consciousness. They appear in literature, art, and storytelling, preserving the memory of a world in which humans were not masters of the sea. Their silent coiling, their immense presence, and their mysterious behavior continue to fascinate and terrify, reminding us that some corners of the earth and the ocean remain beyond our full understanding. In this way, the long, coiling serpents serve both as historical witnesses and as symbols. They embody the intersection of myth, observation, and lived experience. They are a testament to human imagination and caution, to the ability of cultures across the globe to recognize and respect forces greater than themselves. From the fjords of Norway to the tropical waters of Indonesia, sailors have looked to the waves and imagined forms that challenge perception, inspire awe, and remind us that the ocean is more than it seems. The serpents of the deep rise silently alongside ships, moving in ways that defy measurement and expectation. Their presence is a reminder of the patience, humility, and attention required to navigate life on a planet where the unknown still exists quietly below the surface. They are ancient, immense, and enduring, coiling through human memory as surely as they coil through the ocean itself. In the long hours of night, when the water is calm and the ship drifts in silence, it is easy to imagine the gentle rise of their forms alongside, unseen, silent, and eternal, moving with the slow certainty of creatures that have known the deep long before humanity ever sailed upon it. For centuries, the ocean has been both a source of life and a realm of deep mystery. Its surface can appear calm, stretching endlessly toward the horizon. Yet beneath that mirror-like expanse lies a world largely unseen, moving with rhythms that humans cannot fully perceive. For sailors navigating the seas of ancient times, the ocean was never empty. It was a vast, breathing entity, teeming with life, both visible and hidden. Among the creatures whispered about in legends across continents, none inspired such awe, fascination, and quiet terror as the serpents of the deep. Long, coiling, immense, and impossibly graceful, these sea serpents were said to rise silently alongside ships, moving in ways that defied both expectation and comprehension, testing the courage, patience, and imagination of all who encountered them. From the icy fjords of Scandinavia to the tropical waters of Southeast Asia, stories of serpents in the ocean span cultures and generations. Each culture gave its creatures unique forms, but there was a remarkable consistency in their descriptions. These were beings of colossal scale, often coiled in patterns that seemed infinite, their movement synchronized with the ebb and flow of the sea itself. Sailors described witnessing a ripple at the edge of the hull, then another, until finally a dark, glistening arc would rise beside them. The serpent would not leap or strike. Instead, it moved with quiet patience, surveying the human vessels that had intruded into its domain, almost as though it were assessing whether these small beings were to be acknowledged, ignored, or merely tolerated. To be near such a creature was both a privilege and a trial, a reminder of the vastness and indifference of the ocean. In the northern waters of Europe, the serpents were imagined as immense beings, stretching for hundreds of feet, with thick muscular bodies capable of displacing enormous volumes of water. Their scales shimmered under moonlight, creating shifting patterns on the surface of the waves. Some accounts spoke of spines running along their backs, so large they resembled miniature islands emerging from the mist. In the daytime, sunlight might glint off these scales, producing an eerie shimmer that seemed almost supernatural, as if the serpents carried fragments of the sky upon their backs. Cold, dark waters of the North Atlantic provided the perfect environment for such imaginations to flourish. The ocean there is unpredictable, with currents and tides that can shift suddenly, waves that rise and fall without warning, and storms that appear and vanish as if conjured by unseen hands. In these conditions, the boundary between reality and legend is delicate, easily blurred by the mind's desire to understand the unknowable. Asian sailors, meanwhile, described serpents with more sinuous, serpentine form, their bodies curved in elegant arcs, undulating through the depths with almost hypnotic fluidity. Some were said to have horned heads or crests running along their spines, while others carried frilled fins or whisker-like appendages that moved like ripples. Their presence was considered both awe-inspiring and dangerous. In some regions, the sight of a serpent rising alongside a ship was interpreted as an omen, favorable if it moved away calmly, unfavorable if it lingered or created disturbances in the water. These interpretations shaped behavior. Captains would adjust their courses, fishermen would avoid certain waters, and coastal communities would perform rituals meant to appease the creatures, leaving offerings or reciting prayers. The serpents were not simply feared. They were respected, acknowledged as powerful residents of the ocean whose will could not be ignored. The behavior of these serpents was as remarkable as their size. They were not predators in the sense that humans understand. They did not attack for food or territory, at least not in accounts that survived in chronicled stories. Instead, they moved with a kind of deliberate grace, appearing and disappearing according to their own mysterious rhythms. Sailors reported that the water itself seemed to respond to the serpent's movements. Currents shifted subtly, waves formed where there should have been calm, and ripples danced unnaturally across the surface. Some even described hearing faint sounds transmitted through the ship's hull, a deep resonance, a low vibration, or a subtle pulsing that seemed to emanate from the serpent's immense bodies. These sensations were unmistakable and terrifying, conveying a presence that could be felt more than seen. The northern seas, particularly around Scandinavia, provided rich soil for these narratives. In fjords and bays, the serpents were said to move beneath ships, sometimes appearing at night when the fog hung thick and heavy. Sailors navigating in darkness relied on sound and touch to gauge the ocean's temperament, listening to the creaks of the timbers, the slap of waves against the hull, and the faint gurgle of water currents. Any anomaly could be interpreted as a sign of a serpent's approach, a sudden change in wave rhythm, an unusual current, or a shadow flickering beneath the ship's hull. Such encounters often became part of a sailor's personal lore, passed down through cautionary tales and warnings to future crews. Silence and vigilance became essential skills, as the ocean itself seemed to test human attentiveness. In Asia, serpents were often linked to local mythology and cosmology. In some traditions, they were considered guardians of the ocean, capable of influencing storms, tides, and the abundance of fish. Fishermen interpreted the movement of schools of fish or pods of whales as indicators of a serpent's presence. A sudden scattering of creatures could signify danger, while unusually abundant catches might indicate the serpent was nearby, but undisturbed. Sailors and coastal inhabitants developed complex observation practices, learning to read subtle signs in the water, the sky, and even the behavior of birds as part of their interaction with these mysterious beings. Over time, these practices became codified in oral histories, folk tales, and eventually in illustrations and writings meant to guide and warn those who ventured far from shore. Mapmakers attempted to capture the serpents on parchment, but their size and elusiveness defied representation. In many medieval and early modern maps, serpents were depicted partially, an arc rising above waves, a twisting coil curling into the distance, a fin breaking the surface. Their full form was left to imagination. These depictions were both practical and symbolic. They marked regions of potential danger, areas where sailors should proceed cautiously or avoid altogether, and served as reminders that the ocean was alive with forces beyond human control. The serpents were woven into the cultural understanding of the seas, bridging the realms of observation, legend, and cautionary advice. Encounters with serpents were often gradual and drawn out. Sailors would notice a change in the water, a ripple, a shadow, a faint shimmer. Days or even weeks might pass before the full form of a serpent was glimpsed. Sometimes only the head or the tip of a coil would appear, creating the illusion that the creature was smaller than it actually was. Other times, multiple arcs would rise together, suggesting a creature of almost infinite length. Witnesses emphasized the slow, hypnotic movement, noting that it was unlike any other animal they had encountered. Unlike fish, whales, or sharks, the serpents did not swim with haste. Their motion was deliberate, following an internal rhythm, a pulse that seemed aligned with the ocean itself. The serpents were also associated with seasonal and environmental changes. In northern waters, they were more frequently reported in the summer months when fog and mist could obscure visibility, and when long days provided the contrast of light and shadow that made glimpses of their bodies so striking. In tropical regions, sightings were often linked to the monsoon season or periods of unusual tidal activity. Sailors learned to correlate natural phenomena with serpent behavior, using wind patterns, moon phases, and water conditions to anticipate where these creatures might appear. Over time, this knowledge became an integral part of maritime culture, blending myth and empirical observation into a practical understanding of the ocean's temperament. Generational storytelling played a crucial role in sustaining belief in the serpents. Fathers taught sons, captains trained crews, and communities recounted tales at the harbor, embedding the creatures in the shared memory of seafaring peoples. Each retelling added layers of detail, emphasizing size, movement, and the subtle signs of presence. The serpents became both characters and symbols, embodying the mystery, danger, and majesty of the ocean itself. Even when expeditions failed to observe them directly, the memory of past encounters sufficed to guide behavior, reinforcing respect for the sea and the creatures that inhabited it. Scientific knowledge eventually confirmed the existence of several large, elusive marine animals, including giant squids and oarfish, whose size and undulating movements bear striking resemblance to the legendary serpent. While these discoveries have demystified some aspects of the tales, they cannot fully account for the consistency, scale, or cultural significance of the stories. The deep sea remains largely unexplored, and the possibility of unknown, immense creatures preserves the serpent's place in the human imagination. Their legends endure because they touch on fundamental truths about human vulnerability, the limits of perception, and the power of the natural world. The serpent's enormous length and slow, deliberate motion emphasized human smallness. Sailors spoke of the sensation of being dwarfed, of feeling their ship as a fragile object beside the immense, silent presence of a serpent. This humility became a form of reverence, a recognition that the ocean is vast, ancient, and not subject to human control. Observing a serpent, even briefly, was a reminder that life at sea demanded patience, attentiveness, and respect. Encounters were often described in sensory detail. Sailors reported the subtle vibration of water as a serpent moved beneath them, the way waves formed small whirlpools around its body, and the faint glimmer of scales, catching light. They spoke of sounds that traveled through the hull, a low rumble, a distant splash, or a gentle pulsing, suggesting an immense heartbeat beneath the ship. These experiences were memorable not for immediate threat, but for the slow, almost hypnotic realization that humans were in the presence of something incomprehensibly vast and indifferent. Even today, the long, coiling serpents continue to capture the imagination. The deep ocean remains largely unexplored, and new species are discovered regularly. Some are enormous, some move in ways that defy expectation, and some behave in ways reminiscent of the serpents described centuries ago. The legends endure not because they are literal truth, but because they embody the experience of encountering the unknown, the sublime, and the incomprehensible. They remind us that the world is larger than our perception, and that some mysteries are meant to endure quietly beneath the waves. The serpents of the deep also serve as metaphors for patience, awareness, and humility. They rise silently, move deliberately, and exist largely beyond human comprehension. They teach that survival at sea, and perhaps in life itself, requires observation, respect, and the willingness to accept forces beyond control. Their presence reminds us that the ocean is not merely a backdrop for human activity, but a living, breathing environment, home to creatures both seen and unseen, known and unknown, real and imagined. In every region, from the fjords of Norway to the archipelagos of Indonesia, sailors have learned to interpret subtle signs, changes in the water, patterns of waves, the behavior of fish, and even the movement of seabirds. All of these are connected to the serpents whose slow, coiling forms interact with the world in ways that humans can perceive only partially. These observations are passed down, becoming traditions that blend myth, empirical knowledge, and cultural memory. The serpents are not merely creatures, they are part of the rhythm of the ocean, inseparable from the environment in which they live. The long, coiling serpents also carry a sense of timelessness. They appear to move with the patience of centuries, unaffected by human presence. A ship may cross their path without incident, only for another vessel to encounter them days later. Their slow, deliberate approach conveys the immensity of time at sea, the idea that human voyages are fleeting moments against the deep history of the ocean and its inhabitants. Legends of serpents rising alongside ships often describe the creature's eyes or heads briefly breaking the surface. These glimpses are fleeting but unforgettable, leaving an impression that lingers long after the moment has passed. The sailors focus on subtle signs. A ripple, a shadow, a shimmer reflects the attentiveness required to navigate the ocean successfully. The serpents become a test of perception, patience, and respect for forces beyond human control. Even in modern times, when satellites can track storms and scientific instruments measure currents, the serpents continue to inspire wonder. Deep-sea cameras have captured giant eels, enormous squids, and other creatures whose size and movement echo ancient tales. Yet the legends persist because they represent more than biological entities. They are a cultural memory, a reflection of human experience in a vast, mysterious, and powerful environment. The serpents of the deep embody the intersection of myth, observation, and lived experience. They remind us of the limits of perception, the scale of the natural world, and the humility required to navigate a universe larger than ourselves. In quiet moments at sea, when the waves are calm and the horizon stretches endlessly, it is possible to imagine their slow, coiling forms rising alongside the ship, silent, patient, and eternal. They are reminders that the unknown persists, that life beneath the waves continues largely unseen, and that some mysteries are meant to endure quietly beneath the surface, beyond human reach and comprehension. The ocean's long, coiling serpents endure in memory, imagination, and legend. They rise silently, glide alongside ships, and vanish without trace, leaving sailors and observers with awe, wonder, and a profound sense of humility. They are symbols of the unknown, guardians of the deep, and reminders of humanity's small place within a vast living world. Across centuries and oceans, from Scandinavia to Asia, these creatures have persisted in stories, maps, and the minds of those who navigate the seas, bridging the gap between myth and reality, observation and imagination, fear and reverence. Even now, in the stillness of the ocean, when the water lies calm under the moonlight and the ship drifts in silence, it is possible to feel their presence. Perhaps a ripple forms where none should be, a shadow shifts beneath the hull, or a faint glimmering coil appears on the horizon. These moments remind us that the serpents of the deep are more than stories. They are a testament to the power of imagination, the persistence of human memory, and the enduring mystery of the ocean itself. And in that quiet, they coil, endlessly, silently, and eternally, alongside the ships of history, waiting for those who can perceive them, and for those who cannot, lingering in legend, imagination, and the deep, dark waters of the world. Sailors who interpreted these texts often imagined waves forming around the Leviathan as it moved, vortices spinning where its body displaced water, and the ocean's currents shifting in response to its passage. The sense of scale is critical. It is not merely the creature's length or width that is imposing, but the way its very existence alters the perception of the surrounding world. Humans in its presence are infinitesimal. Their efforts and tools become inconsequential. Many ancient cultures believe the Leviathan to inhabit the deepest parts of the sea, regions humans rarely explored. These depths were places of cold, pressure, and darkness, where light barely penetrates and sound behaves strangely. To sailors and chroniclers of sacred texts, the depths themselves were both terrifying and sacred, a space beyond ordinary human experience. Within this darkness, the Leviathan moves with quiet inevitability, appearing only when conditions align or when cosmic events demand its emergence. It is a creature of the abyss, a reminder that some forces remain hidden until the moment they reveal themselves. The Leviathan is also associated with the concept of primordial waters, chaotic seas from which life itself emerged. In many myths, the world began with water, and the Leviathan existed from this very chaos, a creature that had no beginning and no end, coiled in the void before the cosmos took shape. Its presence links humanity to the larger universe, to forces that are not constrained by time, morality, or human understanding. Sailors who encountered rough seas, violent storms, or strange, unexplained phenomena often invoked the Leviathan in prayer or supplication, acknowledging that what they faced was not merely weather or chance, but the work of a being whose scale dwarfed their comprehension. Stories describe the Leviathan's movements as deliberate, patient, and terrifyingly graceful. Unlike ordinary animals, it does not rush. Its motion creates waves, currents, and tides that subtly, almost imperceptibly, warn observers of its proximity. Ships caught near its coils might feel a tug in the water, a subtle vibration through the hull, or notice currents shifting in ways that defy expectation. These experiences reinforce the creature's symbolic role as a teacher. It does not act with aggression, but it demands respect, vigilance, and humility from all who traverse its domain. The sacred texts often emphasize the Leviathan's teeth or mouth as instruments of cosmic significance. They are described as massive and powerful, capable of consuming entire fleets or reshaping landscapes in metaphorical accounts. The mouth, jaws, or even the breath of the Leviathan are invoked in some myths as forces that can create storms, divide oceans, or alter the natural world. Yet even with such overwhelming destructive power, the Leviathan is not evil. Its chaos is part of the natural and spiritual order, reminding humanity that destruction and creation are intertwined, that power exists beyond judgment, and that respect for such forces is essential for survival. In addition to its physicality, the Leviathan embodies lessons about time and patience. Its slow, deliberate movements mirror the rhythm of the ocean and the unfolding of cosmic events. Humans perceive life in hours, days, and seasons, but the Leviathan operates on scales that transcend human understanding. To observe it is to witness patience incarnate, a force that exists in perpetuity, whose actions are measured against centuries and millennia rather than days or years. This timelessness underscores its symbolic role in sacred texts. It is a constant, eternal, and inescapable presence, reminding humanity of its own transience. The Leviathan's depiction in various cultures reinforces universal themes. In Mesopotamian mythology, it appears as a monstrous sea dragon defeated or restrained by gods, symbolizing the triumph of order over primordial chaos. In Hebrew texts, it is described with poetic intensity as a twisting, coiling sea monster, embodying strength, unpredictability, and divine mystery. In other traditions, it emerges as a guardian of sacred or hidden realms beneath the waves, a being whose presence must be approached with reverence. Across all these stories, the Leviathan represents a bridge between the known and the unknown, between human perception and forces beyond comprehension. Sailors in coastal communities internalize these stories, blending practical maritime knowledge with mythic understanding. The ocean is unpredictable, full of hidden currents, sudden storms, and unseen obstacles. By personifying these dangers in the form of the Leviathan, communities could pass on warnings, teach patience, and instill respect for the sea. The Leviathan became both a literary symbol and a practical guide, reminding navigators that survival depended not only on skill but on observation, humility, and attunement to forces larger than themselves. The Leviathan's symbolism extends beyond chaos to encompass renewal and transformation. Just as the ocean shapes coastlines and carves valleys beneath the waves, the Leviathan represents processes of destruction and creation that operate on scales far beyond human influence. Its presence reminds observers that change, upheaval, and uncertainty are integral to life itself. This duality, chaos and order, destruction and renewal, is central to its enduring power as a symbol in sacred texts. Accounts often describe encounters with the Leviathan in highly sensory terms. The water may ripple without wind, waves might rise in patterns that defy expectation, and currents could tug unpredictably at anchors and ropes. Sailors reported hearing deep resonant sounds that seemed to emanate from the creature itself, vibrations that traveled through the hull and hull timbers. The source. At times, glimpses of enormous eyes or glistening scales could be seen breaking the surface, an awe-inspiring reminder of scale, power, and the limits of perception. These experiences were memorable not for immediate violence, but for the profound impression of existing alongside a force that is vast, ancient, and indifferent to human concerns. The Leviathan also plays a role in cosmological narratives, representing the balance of power between order and chaos. Its presence is often linked to divine forces that either restrain battle or harmonize it with the world. In these stories, the Leviathan's immense power is contained only by higher authority or cosmic law, emphasizing that while chaos exists, it is neither random nor absolute. It is part of the greater order that governs existence. Humans in these myths are observers and participants, learning lessons of humility, respect, and awareness from their encounters, whether real or symbolic. Even in modern times, the Leviathan continues to capture human imagination. Deep-sea exploration has revealed enormous squid, eels, and other creatures whose existence validates some aspects of ancient accounts. Yet the Leviathan remains more than biological reality. It is a symbol of what lies beyond understanding, a representation of the forces seen and unseen that shape the world. Its legend endures because it addresses fundamental human experiences: awe, fear, humility, and the desire to comprehend what is larger than ourselves. The Leviathan's movements are often imagined as both terrifying and beautiful. Its coils rise gracefully through water, glinting in sunlight or moonlight, creating patterns of shadow and light that mesmerize observers. Currents spiral around its massive body, waves form in intricate patterns, and the air itself seems to vibrate with the presence of something immense. Sailors who have recorded these encounters emphasize patience and quiet observation. The Leviathan does not need to strike to impress. Its majesty is conveyed through sheer scale, movement, and presence. In addition to its physical and symbolic attributes, the Leviathan represents time itself. It exists on scales far beyond human perception, its actions unfolding over centuries and millennia. Observing it, even in thought or story, reminds humanity that life is temporary, fragile, and subject to forces beyond understanding. Its enduring presence in sacred text reflects a deep awareness of this truth. That existence is shaped by powers that are timeless, immense, and indifferent, and that respect, humility, and attention are the only proper responses. Across cultures, the Leviathan has served as both warning and guide. Sailors, poets, scholars, and spiritual leaders have invoked it to explain the unexplainable, to give form to chaos, and to teach lessons about patience, respect, and perception. Its legend persists because it bridges human experience and cosmic reality, offering insight into both the natural world and the spiritual order that governs it. In stories, maps, and sacred writings, the Leviathan coils through history, reminding humanity of the vastness, power, and mystery of the world beneath and beyond the waves. Even now, as ships traverse oceans measured by satellite and guided by instruments, the Leviathan story endures. It lingers in cultural memory, in the imagination of those who look out at the sea and wonder what moves beneath, in the rhythm of waves, the pull of currents in the depths too dark and cold to explore. The Leviathan's coiling form, its immense size, and its embodiment of chaos continue to captivate, teaching humility, patience, and reverence. It is a creature of legend, yes, but also a reminder that the unknown persists, that the ocean remains vast, and that some mysteries are eternal, silent, and immeasurable. In the quiet hours at sea, when water lies still under the moon and the ship drifts with gentle swells, it is possible to imagine the Leviathan stirring deep below. Perhaps a ripple forms, subtle and deliberate. Perhaps a coil breaks the surface for a fleeting moment, disappearing before it can be fully understood. The presence of such a being is not meant to terrify in the immediate sense, but to inspire awe, respect, and the understanding that life, time, and the universe itself are vaster than human comprehension. In this way, the Leviathan continues to live, coiling silently in the depths, eternally entwined with the sacred waters of history, legend, and imagination. Across millennia, the Leviathan has remained a constant in sacred texts, myth, and cultural memory. It is more than a sea creature. It is a symbol of chaos, power, and the enduring mystery of the universe. It reminds humanity that some forces are eternal, that the unknown is vast, and that the ocean, life, and existence itself are shaped by rhythms far larger than ourselves. To encounter the Leviathan, whether in story, symbol, or imagination, is to face awe, to witness the immense, and to recognize humanity's small but reverent place within the unfolding currents of history, nature, and the cosmos. From the earliest days of human thought, the ocean has been a source of both life and profound mystery. Its surface stretches endlessly, reflecting the sky, clouds, and sun, while beneath lies a hidden realm moving in rhythms that humans cannot fully perceive. Within this vast expanse, ancient peoples imagined creatures whose size, power, and meaning exceeded ordinary comprehension. Among these, none was as significant or terrifying as the Leviathan. It is described not merely as a creature, but as a cosmic force created before humanity, an embodiment of chaos and primordial power. In sacred texts and myths, the Leviathan represents the untamable, the unknown, and the immense forces that shape the world, both seen and unseen. The Leviathan's presence appears in numerous cultures, from Mesopotamia to the Hebrew Bible, each describing it as a being of incomprehensible scale and strength. Its body is often imagined as coiling endlessly through the ocean, covered in gleaming scales that reflect light in dazzling patterns. Its eyes are immense, glowing with an ancient knowledge that hints at a time before human history. Some texts describe multiple heads or horned crests, adding to its otherworldly majesty. Despite variations, the Leviathan consistently embodies chaos and power, the raw forces of the primordial world that precede the establishment of order. To encounter or even imagine it is to confront a being that exists beyond human understanding, a reminder of humanity's smallness in the face of the cosmos. The creation of the Leviathan is often portrayed as preceding human existence. It emerges from the primordial waters, a creature born of the chaotic depths, before mountains were formed or rivers carved valleys into the earth. In this sense, it is not just a creature but a principle, a representation of the forces that shaped the universe. Sailors, scholars, and priests interpreted it as a being whose very existence maintained the balance between chaos and order, whose movements influenced tides, storms, and currents, and whose presence reminded humans that the world is far larger than they perceive. Stories emphasize that the Leviathan's power is absolute, its scale unmatched, and its patience unfathomable. Accounts of its appearance are mesmerizing. The Leviathan is said to rise slowly from the ocean, its immense coils disturbing the water in ways that ripple for miles. Waves gather around it, creating patterns of motion that seem unnatural, almost magical. Ships caught near it are dwarfed, their crews overwhelmed by the silent reminder that the forces of the world are not under human control. Sailors emphasize that the Leviathan does not act with malice in ordinary encounters. Its presence is a natural, deliberate, and inevitable manifestation of the primordial ocean's power, demanding respect rather than provoking fear alone. Dune. In Mesopotamian texts, the Leviathan appears as a monstrous sea dragon, often engaged in cosmic battles with gods. Its immense size represents the untamed chaos that predates creation, and its defeat or restraint by divine beings symbolizes the establishment of order. In Hebrew scriptures, the Leviathan is described in poetic passages as twisting and coiling through the deep, reflecting both power and mystery. The creature is feared for its strength and unpredictability, but revered as a vital part of the universe's structure. Across cultures, it is consistently a symbol of the primordial, the eternal, and the incomprehensible, a being that embodies forces far beyond human ability to control. The Leviathan's movement is deliberate, slow, and mesmerizing. Unlike ordinary predators that hunt for food, it moves with patience and intention, existing on scales of time incomprehensible to humans. Its rise from the depths can last hours or days, its coils creating currents that shift unpredictably, ripples that travel far across the ocean. Sailors recount feeling subtle vibrations through the hull of ships, noticing changes in currents, and witnessing waves forming without wind. These encounters were not violent but deeply humbling, emphasizing the Leviathan's immense scale and the necessity of human reverence toward forces far greater than themselves. The ocean depths where the Leviathan resides are imagined as both terrifying and sacred. Cold, dark, and largely unexplored, These waters are home to unseen creatures and powerful currents that challenge human understanding. The Leviathan moves through this environment with ease, its presence subtly affecting fish, seabirds, and even weather patterns. Coastal communities and seafarers observed these changes and attributed them to the Leviathan's passage. These observations formed the basis of rituals, prayers, and cultural practices designed to honor or appease the creature. Offerings, incantations, and careful attention to omens ensured that humans remained in harmony with the forces of the ocean and the Leviathan's domain. The Leviathan's immense size is central to its symbolism. Texts often describe it as coiling around entire seas, stretching its body across waves so large that ships seem like toys beside it. Its scales are thick and armor-like, reflecting sunlight or moonlight in ways that dazzle and disorient. Its eyes, glowing with an inner light, suggest intelligence and awareness far beyond human comprehension. In some narratives, its mouth or breath has the power to shape storms, create tidal waves, or affect weather patterns. These descriptions underline the Leviathan's role as a cosmic force rather than a mere biological entity, representing power, unpredictability, and the limits of human knowledge. The Leviathan is frequently linked to chaos, the raw force that exists before order is established. In mythic narratives, it is restrained, defeated, or tamed by divine intervention, symbolizing the triumph of order over primordial forces. Yet this chaos is not malevolent. It is an essential part of the natural and spiritual order. Humans, through their encounters or imagination, learn lessons about patience, humility, and the limits of their perception. The Leviathan teaches that life, the ocean, and the universe operate on scales far beyond human understanding, and that survival requires respect for forces that cannot be dominated. Descriptions of encounters with the Leviathan are often immersive and sensory. Sailors might observe waves forming in unnatural patterns, currents tugging unexpectedly at anchors and ropes. Even in symbolic or literary descriptions, these sensory details convey a profound sense of presence, demonstrating that the Leviathan's power lies not only in potential destruction, but in the sheer recognition of forces far larger than humanity. The Leviathan's association with time is profound. Its slow, deliberate movements mirror the rhythms of the universe, operating on scales of centuries and millennia. Humans perceive time in days, months, and seasons, but the Leviathan exists on a cosmic clock unconcerned with human schedules. Observing it, even through story or imagination, instills a sense of humility and patience. The creature is eternal in its domain, unhurried, indifferent, and inescapable, a reminder that human concerns are fleeting against the vast unfolding currents of existence. Cultural interpretations further enrich the Leviathan's legend. In some texts, it is depicted as a guardian of sacred realms beneath the waves, an entity whose power is both protective and potentially destructive. Sailors consulted these stories when navigating dangerous waters, interpreting omens in the behavior of waves, fish, and seabirds. The Leviathan became part of a shared framework of understanding, blending myth with observation. It offered both guidance and warning, teaching humans how to live in harmony with forces far beyond their control. The Leviathan also embodies renewal and transformation. Its chaos is not purely destructive. It shapes, reshapes, and organizes the world in ways that humans cannot fully grasp. Coastal landscapes, tides, and the distribution of marine life are all subtly influenced in narrative imagination by its presence. Destruction and creation are intertwined in its symbolism, reflecting the cyclical nature of life, the ocean, and the universe. Encounters with or thoughts of the Leviathan inspire contemplation of the balance between chaos and order, mortality and eternity, human fragility and cosmic scale. Even in modern exploration, the Leviathan continues to captivate. Deep-sea discoveries of giant squids, enormous eels, and other massive creatures lend plausibility to ancient accounts, but they cannot fully explain the legend's scope. Its symbolic power persists because it represents forces unseen and unknown, a manifestation of chaos and wonder. The Leviathan reminds humans that the ocean is still largely unexplored, that life and energy exist beyond immediate perception, and that some mysteries are eternal, beyond science and observation. The Leviathan's movement is a study in majesty. It rises, coils, and glides with deliberate grace, producing waves and currents that ripple outward in hypnotic patterns. Its presence affects the environment subtly but profoundly, shaping tides, influencing marine life, and even altering weather patterns in mythic imagination. Observers learn patience and attentiveness, realizing that the most powerful forces are not always violent or aggressive, but immense, silent, and eternal. The creature's mouth, teeth, and breath carry symbolic. In narratives, they have the power to reshape landscapes, create storms, and challenge human endurance. Yet these depictions serve not only to instill fear, but also to teach respect. The Leviathan's abilities illustrate that strength exists independently of morality, that power is not inherently evil but immense, and that humans must approach the unknown with caution, wisdom, and humility. Its coiled form, immense scale, and control over chaos make it a force that defines the limits of human understanding. Even today, the Leviathan story endures in literature, art, and imagination. It is a reminder of the ocean's immensity, the mysteries that lie beneath, and the ancient understanding that humans are small participants in a vast, unfolding universe. Its presence teaches reverence, patience, and awe. The creature embodies chaos, time, and transformation, urging contemplation of forces far greater than human life, civilization, and ambition. In quiet hours at sea, one can imagine the Leviathan stirring beneath the wave. A ripple forms without wind, a coil glimmers in moonlight, and currents shift subtly around an unseen body. These moments remind sailors, storytellers, and dreamers that the Leviathan is not just legend, but a symbol of the enduring, the immense, and the incomprehensible. Its presence, whether imagined, chronicled, or encountered in the depths of the mind, reinforces lessons of humility, respect, and awareness for forces far beyond human comprehension. Across millennia, Leviathan has remained central to sacred texts, myths, and cultural memory. It is more than a creature. It is a representation of chaos, power, and the eternal mysteries of the universe. It reminds humanity that some forces exist beyond control, that the ocean is vast and alive, and that life itself is shaped by rhythms and energies far larger than ourselves. To contemplate the Leviathan is to face awe, understand the limits of perception, and recognize humanity's small but reverent place within the currents of history, nature, and the cosmos. Even now, in the stillness of the ocean, when waves lie calm and ships drift with gentle motion, one can imagine the Leviathan moving silently beneath the surface. Perhaps a coil rises briefly, perhaps currents ripple subtly, hinting at the immense power that remains unseen. Its presence is a reminder that chaos, order, time, and eternity coexist, that the universe is vast, and that some mysteries are eternal, silent, and immeasurable. The Leviathan endures in story, symbol, and imagination, coiling endlessly through history, legend, and the living waters of the world, teaching patience, respect, and reverence to all who dare to contemplate its immensity. Throughout history, the sea has been a place of wonder, danger, and the unknown. Its vast, shifting expanse stretches beyond the horizon, reflecting sky and sunlight during the day, and moonlight and stars at night, while below the surface lies a world humans can scarcely imagine. For millennia, sailors and explorers have ventured into these waters, charting unknown coasts, navigating treacherous currents, and observing the life that thrives beneath the waves. Amid these voyages, some of the most compelling accounts concern creatures so immense, mysterious, and seemingly impossible that they blur the line between legend and reality. These were not simple stories passed from one generation to the next. Many came from witnesses, trained, experienced, and often skeptical sailors who swore they had seen these creatures with their own eyes. They were not storytellers seeking fame. They were navigators, observers, and explorers chronicling the inexplicable encounters they could neither fully explain nor ignore. These eyewitness accounts span centuries, cultures, and oceans. In the northern seas, explorers spoke of long, coiling shapes rising alongside ships, moving with a hypnotic grace that seemed impossible for any known animal. In the southern oceans, sailors recounted massive fins cutting through the water, creating waves that dwarfed even the largest vessels. In tropical waters, reports of serpentine bodies, undulating across the surface, emerged from fishing communities, traders, and naval officers alike. Despite the differences in geography and culture, there is remarkable consistency in these observations. Creatures were immense, intelligent in movement, and interacted with their environment in ways that made ordinary explanations inadequate. Witnesses did not describe simple fish or whales. They described beings that defied conventional understanding, moving with a quiet, deliberate power that inspired both awe and fear. Experienced sailors often began their accounts by emphasizing the credibility of their observation. These were men and women accustomed to reading the subtle rhythms of the sea. They could interpret currents, tides, wind patterns, and animal behavior to anticipate storms, locate fish, or navigate treacherous waters. They were trained to observe the ocean carefully and to recognize its moods and anomalies. When such individuals reported seeing immense serpents, leviathans, or other unknown creatures, their testimonies were grounded not in fantasy, but in careful observation. Many noted the exact time, location, and conditions of the sighting, describing the color of the water, the shape and size of the creature, its movement, and even the sounds transmitted through the hull of the ship. Their words carry a weight different from myths or folk tales. These were witnesses reporting phenomena they could not rationalize but could not ignore. In the cold northern seas, particularly around Scandinavia and the North Atlantic, sailors spoke of long, coiling creatures surfacing near their ships. One captain recounted that he first noticed a ripple that seemed unusual against the wind and current. At first, he thought it was another vessel, a shifting school of fish, or even a floating log, but the shape persisted and grew. Slowly, a massive undulating body emerged, glistening under the pale northern sun. It moved with deliberate rhythmic grace, its sheer size displacing waves that rocked the ship gently but perceptibly. The crew observed in silence, noting the movement of water along its length and the occasional glimpse of eyes that reflected light in an almost intelligent manner. The creature remained visible for hours before submerging, leaving a trail of disturbed water that persisted long after its disappearance. This was not a story meant to thrill. It was a meticulous report, verified by multiple members of the crew, who had no reason to fabricate such an encounter. In the tropical oceans, merchants and naval officers alike recorded encounters with creatures that seemed to glide effortlessly across thousands of feet of open water. These observers often described a hypnotic undulation in the water, accompanied by flashes of color and texture that suggested immense, scale-covered bodies. Some noted that the creatures interacted with currents, creating patterns that seemed almost deliberate, altering the behavior of schools of fish and even influencing the paths of smaller waves. In these accounts, the observers noted a sense of awareness or intelligence. The creatures appeared to track ships, sometimes matching their pace, sometimes retreating to avoid them, but always demonstrating a deliberate, measured motion. These were not mindless animals reacting instinctively. They exhibited a pattern of behavior that invited study, contemplation, and respect. Beyond mere observation, many sailors emphasized the sensory impact of the encounters. They described the subtle vibration of water as a massive creature moved beneath the hull, the sound of displaced currents, and the unusual movement of waves that seemed to respond to an unseen presence. Some recorded glimpses of eyes, glimmering scales, or frilled fins breaking the surface. Others mentioned the smell of the sea, subtly altered by the creature's proximity, or the sudden, inexplicable movement of seabirds and fish. These details suggest that the witnesses were attuned not only to visual phenomena, but to the broader environmental cues that accompany the presence of something immense, alive, and unknown. Their observations were holistic, encompassing every sense and every subtle change in the maritime environment. Eyewitness accounts also often recorded timing, context, and the conditions of observation with remarkable detail. Storms, fog, calm seas, and varying light all influenced how these creatures were perceived. Some were first seen in early morning mist, their forms partially obscured, leaving much to the imagination. Others appeared during midday sun, revealing every scale, ridge, and undulating movement. In certain accounts, creatures were reported following ships for days, coiling alongside the hull, sometimes surfacing multiple times in succession. Witnesses stressed that these encounters were prolonged, deliberate, and consistent, far more than a fleeting glimpse of an ordinary animal. The persistent and repeated nature of the observations adds credibility, suggesting that what was seen was real, not imagined. The testimonies of explorers who circumnavigated continents, crossed oceans, or ventured into unknown waters are particularly compelling. Many of these men and women maintained detailed journals, noting latitude, longitude, wind direction, water temperature, and even the behavior of marine life around the observed creature. These logs often included sketches, measurements, and repeated observations over multiple days. They recorded not only the immediate appearance of the creatures, but also subtle signs of interaction with the environment, the way currents shifted, the disturbance of plankton or fish, and even changes in local weather patterns. The level of detail in these accounts points to meticulous observation, careful recording, and the inability to rationally explain what was witnessed. Even skeptics, trained in natural philosophy and early scientific inquiry, encountered these phenomena and struggled to rationalize them. In the 17th and 18th centuries, naturalists, cartographers, and naval officers occasionally reported sightings in journals or letters, emphasizing that they were describing observations, not folklore. They noted immense, serpentine shapes moving through the water, sometimes coiling or rising in arcs, often leaving disturbances in the waves. These details suggest that the witnesses were attuned not only to visual phenomena, but to the broader environmental cues that accompany the presence of something immense and alive. Timing and context were carefully recorded in many accounts. Storms, fog, calm seas, and varying light all influenced how the creatures were perceived. Some sightings occurred in the early morning mist, leaving much of the creature's body obscured, while others took place in the bright midday sun, revealing every scale and ridge. Witnesses sometimes observed the same creature repeatedly over days, noting consistent patterns in movement, size, and behavior. Ships were followed for hours, even days, by creatures that appeared to respond to their presence, creating a rhythm of interaction that was deliberate and predictable in its unpredictability. These repeated encounters suggest that the creatures were not fleeting illusions or tricks of light, but persistent, intelligent beings that existed alongside human observers. Explorers and naval officers who maintained detailed journals provided some of the most compelling compelling read some of the most 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 compelling record 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 some of the most compelling records 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 some of the most compelling records. Their logs included latitude, longitude, wind direction, water temperature, and detailed observations of marine life surrounding the creatures. Sketches and descriptions often accompanied these entries, documenting the creature's size, shape, and movements with precision. Observers noted how currents shifted in response to the creature, how schools of fish scattered or changed direction, and how waves behaved differently in its presence. The meticulous nature of these records reinforces the credibility of the accounts, suggesting that trained, careful observers were encountering phenomena that defied conventional understanding. Even skeptics struggled to rationalize these sightings. In the 17th and 18th centuries, naturalists and early scientists sometimes documented encounters, emphasizing that they were reporting observations, not folklore. They described immense serpentine shapes coiling through the water, occasionally rising in arches or causing waves to ripple unpredictably. While some suggested explanations, giant squids, unknown whales, or optical illusions, the size, behavior, and repeated observations of these creatures often exceeded any known species. These accounts show that the phenomena were taken seriously by experienced and critical observers, lending weight to the argument that something extraordinary existed in the oceans. Witnesses frequently describe the emotional impact of these encounters. Observing a creature of such immense size and deliberate power often inspired awe, humility, and contemplation. Sailors recounted feeling their own smallness against the backdrop of the vast, untamable ocean. The creatures did not usually attack. Their presence alone reminded observers of the immensity of the natural world, of forces beyond human comprehension. The experience was transformative, teaching patience, attentiveness, and respect for the unknown. To see such a being was to witness the limits of human knowledge and to recognize that the ocean contains mysteries that remain unconquered and unfathomable. Cultural responses to these encounters varied, but many communities developed rituals and practices to honor the unknown forces of the sea. Offerings, prayers, and careful observation became part of maritime culture, ensuring that humans approached the ocean with respect and caution. Witnesses often emphasized that these rituals were serious and essential, reinforcing the lesson that survival at sea required reverence for forces beyond human control. The creatures were at once real and symbolic, serving as reminders of the power, intelligence, and mystery of the ocean. Some accounts describe repeated, almost ritualistic interactions between sailors and the creatures. Their accounts form a legacy of maritime observation, offering insight into the mysteries of the ocean and the creatures that may inhabit its depths. Even today, the ocean retains its secrets. Vast, dark, and largely unexplored, it moves in rhythms beyond human understanding. Waves ripple, currents shift, and enormous creatures glide silently beneath the surface, largely unseen. The historical accounts of sailors remind us that the unknown persists, that the deep sea may harbor life far beyond ordinary comprehension, and that careful observation, patience, and respect are essential when engaging with the ocean's mysteries. Witnesses have left a record of encounters that inspire awe, caution, and humility, emphasizing that some aspects of reality remain vast, powerful, and waiting to be understood. In the end, these eyewitness accounts reveal a world beneath the waves that is alive, immense, and often beyond explanation. They remind humanity that the ocean is not merely a resource or a pathway for exploration. It is a living, breathing world inhabited by forces and beings that defy conventional understanding. The witnesses, with their meticulous observations and unwavering testimony, offer a profound message. The ocean is a place of wonder, mystery, and extraordinary life, and those who encounter it, even fleetingly, are forever changed. These accounts endure as a testament to the unknown, to the majesty of the sea, and to the remarkable creatures that may yet remain hidden, coiling, gliding, and existing silently alongside humanity's path across the waves. Since the dawn of seafaring, humans have looked upon the ocean with a mixture of awe, fear, and fascination. Its vast surface stretches endlessly, reflecting the sky in shifting hues of blue, gray, and silver, while beneath lies a world largely inaccessible to human eyes. For centuries, every ripple, shadow, and unusual wave became a source of speculation, and every unexplained sound or movement beneath the water could give rise to stories of monstrous beings, enormous serpents, and creatures beyond imagination. These early accounts were grounded in genuine observation. Sailors in coastal communities encountered whales, giant squids, unusual fish, and strange weather phenomena. To those with limited scientific knowledge, the immense, mysterious, and sometimes terrifying ocean naturally gave rise to legends. Over time, as science advanced and observation became more systematic, these once feared monsters began to transform from objects of terror into figures of folklore. Yet even as scientific understanding grew, the ocean remained, and remains, largely unexplored, still holding secrets that defy prediction, inspiring the imagination, and reminding humanity of its smallness in the face of the unknown. In the earliest records, sea monsters were described with a striking combination of detail and exaggeration. Ancient maps often depicted coiled serpents at the edges of known waters, marking places where navigation was uncertain, where the familiar ended and the terrifying began. These creatures were sometimes portrayed as enormous, with multiple heads, armored scales, or the ability to sink entire ships. Such accounts were not mere inventions. Sailors observed strange phenomena. These encounters, interpreted through the lens of cultural belief and limited knowledge, became stories of leviathans, krakens, and serpents of the deep. Fear and imagination intertwined, giving shape to creatures whose size and power reflected the overwhelming vastness of the oceans themselves. As seafaring expanded and voyages became longer and more frequent, reports of sea monsters multiplied. Navigators crossed oceans and encountered phenomena that were unfamiliar, mysterious, and often terrifying. Tales circulated among sailors, sudden currents that seemed alive, massive shadows beneath the hull, waves that moved against the wind, and creatures that rose and disappeared as if they were intelligent. These stories were shared with caution, often whispered in port towns or recorded in ship logs. Sailors described creatures as long, coiling, and immense, sometimes following vessels for days, and sometimes appearing only briefly to vanish beneath the surface. Repeated encounters, consistent descriptions, and the authority of experienced seafarers lent credibility to these accounts. To the untrained eye, they might have seemed mythical, but for those who lived on the water, they were real, urgent, and worthy of careful attention. Over time, however, the advancement of science began to reinterpret these stories. Naturalists and early scientists sought explanations rooted in observation, anatomy, and biology. Creatures once thought to be monstrous were identified as giant squids, whales, or unknown species of fish. Optical illusions, floating debris, and unusual weather patterns explain some of the more extraordinary claims. Where once fear dominated, curiosity began to emerge. Sailors and scientists alike started to record their observations methodically, measuring size, documenting behavior, and mapping sightings with precision. What had been terrifying monsters became subjects of study, objects of fascination, and eventually, figures in folklore rather than sources of genuine fear. Yet even as science offered explanations, it could not account for every sighting. The ocean's vastness, its depths largely inaccessible, and the possibility of unknown life forms preserved the mystery, allowing fear to evolve into legend rather than disappear entirely. The transformation from fear to folklore was gradual. Early accounts were vivid and terrifying. Descriptions of creatures capable of dragging ships beneath the waves, coiling around masts, or striking with immense force. These tales conveyed not only physical threat, but a profound psychological one, emphasizing the unpredictability and power of the sea. As scientific understanding improved, many of these descriptions were reframed. Monsters were reduced in scale, their behaviors attributed to known marine animals, their extraordinary powers explained by exaggeration or misperception. Yet in folklore, the creatures persisted, immortalized in tales that were retold for entertainment, instruction, or cultural identity. The sea monsters remained, but their ability to induce fear gradually gave way to their role as symbols of mystery, awe, and imagination. The role of explorers and naturalists was crucial in this shift. From the Renaissance through the Enlightenment, individuals traveled the oceans with an eye for discovery, documentation, and a classification. They observed enormous squids, strange fish, and whales of unimaginable size, noting every detail with care. Their findings were published, sometimes sparking controversy, as they challenged centuries-old myths. In some cases, the confirmation of giant creatures validated earlier accounts, while in others, careful observation demystified the monstrous. The result was a nuanced understanding. The ocean was home to strange and powerful life, but it was not governed by the fantastical horrors that earlier generations imagined. The monsters had not vanished. They had simply been reframed, integrated into the realm of natural history and folklore. Despite the scientific reinterpretation, fear never entirely disappeared. The ocean is vast, deep, and largely unexplored. Even with modern technology, significant portions of the world's seas remain hidden, shrouded in darkness and mystery. Deep-sea trenches, unexplored ridges, and inaccessible currents continue to harbor life forms unknown to science. Submersibles and deep-sea cameras occasionally capture creatures that appear fantastical, reminiscent of the monsters of old. Sightings of oarfish, giant squids, and enormous jellyfish evoke the same sense of wonder and caution that inspired sailors centuries ago. The ocean's inaccessibility preserves the possibility that some legends may have been rooted in reality, and that fear, once a survival mechanism, has become a cultural memory and a testament to human imagination in the face of the unknown. Folklore also preserved lessons about respect, humility, and survival. Tales of monsters often carried warnings for sailors: avoid certain waters, be cautious during storms, and respect the rhythms of the ocean. While science explained many phenomena, the symbolic value of these stories endured. Monsters represented the unpredictable, the uncontrollable, and the overwhelming power of nature. Even as literal belief in these creatures declined, their metaphorical presence continued to teach about the dangers and beauty of the sea. Fear had become a tool of cultural memory, encoded in stories that entertained and instructed, while imagination kept the unknown alive. Artists, writers, and storytellers further contributed to this evolution. Paintings depicted enormous serpents or krakens entangled with ships, engravings illustrated massive creatures rising from the depths, and literature explored encounters with the unknown. These artistic interpretations emphasized drama, scale, and the sublime, capturing both terror and fascination. By placing monsters in imaginative, symbolic contexts, culture allowed fear to transform into wonder. The ocean remained a place of mystery, but the monsters became a reflection of human curiosity, creativity, and the enduring sense that the world is larger than we can fully perceive. The persistence of folklore also reveals the interplay between fear and the unknown. While science has demystified many oceanic phenomena, it cannot eliminate the ocean's immensity, depth, or the possibility of unknown creatures. Waves, currents, and weather patterns remain unpredictable, and the deep sea is still largely a frontier. Folklore fills this space, providing a narrative framework for understanding what is unknown. Monsters serve as placeholders for our ignorance, representations of forces too vast or subtle for direct comprehension. In this sense, the transformation from fear to folklore is not a loss, but a reorientation. The ocean's power remains, but it is expressed through imagination and cultural memory rather than immediate terror. The role of storytelling in maritime culture is also significant. Stories of monsters were shared around fires in ports and aboard ships. They entertained, educated, and reinforced social bonds. Experienced sailors told tales not merely to frighten, but to convey lessons. The sea demands respect, caution is necessary, and even the most experienced mariners must remain humble. These stories persisted even as scientific explanations emerged, showing that folklore is not merely a substitute for knowledge, but a complementary way of engaging with the unknown. It preserves the emotional, psychological, and cultural dimensions of human experience at sea, ensuring that the ocean's mysteries remain alive in imagination and memory. Even modern science acknowledges the limits of human knowledge. Deep-sea exploration continues to reveal species previously unknown, some of astonishing size and form. The ocean's complexity, from its microbiomes to its abyssal plains, remains largely unmapped. Each discovery invites reflection on the creatures once feared, the legends that arose, and the thin line between observation and imagination. In this way, folklore preserves the echo of fear, even as science provides explanation. The monsters have not disappeared. They have been transformed, existing in the space between reality, perception, and myth. The psychological dimension of these stories is also worth noting. Fear is a fundamental human response, shaped by survival instincts and environmental uncertainty. At sea, where isolation, danger, and vastness converge, fear is amplified. Sea monsters embodied this fear, providing tangible form to intangible anxieties. As understanding increased, fear became less immediate, but it did not vanish. Instead, it was encoded into narrative, preserved as folklore, legend, and metaphor. Tales of krakens, leviathans, and serpents became repositories of collective memory, maintaining the emotional resonance of the unknown while integrating it into culture, art, and education. Another aspect of this evolution is the blending of observation and imagination. Early sailors combined careful observation with interpretive storytelling, creating narratives that were part report, part legend. Even as science clarified many aspects of marine life, the imaginative layer remained, giving depth, drama, and enduring cultural significance to encounters with the unknown. Folklore thus became a way of grappling with both what is known and what remains mysterious, preserving the awe, respect, and wonder inspired by the ocean's vastness. The persistence of maritime folklore demonstrates the human need to narrativize the unknown. Stories of monsters, even when no longer believed literally, provide a framework for understanding the ocean's unpredictability and power. They remind humans of their vulnerability, the limits of perception, and the importance of humility. Even as fear diminishes, imagination continues to animate the depths, keeping alive the sense that the ocean is a realm of wonders, surprises, and perhaps creatures yet to be discovered. Finally, these stories illustrate the relationship between fear, knowledge, and the unknown. Fear motivates caution, observation, and respect. As knowledge increases, fear may diminish, but the unknown persists. Folklore preserves the memory of fear, translating it into cultural wisdom, narrative richness, and imaginative exploration. The monsters of the past become the symbols, metaphors, and imaginative companions of the present. Science explains much, but the ocean remains a frontier, vast, deep, and largely unexplored. In this space, folklore continues to thrive, honoring the mysteries that gave rise to fear, sustaining the awe inspired by the unseen, and reminding humanity that some secrets are eternal, hidden in the endless expanse of water, waves, and currents. Even today, explorers, divers, and scientists venture into the unknown depths, encountering life that challenges expectations, forms that surprise, and phenomena that cannot be fully explained. In those moments, the monsters of old seem not entirely imaginary. They persist as a reminder of the ocean's power, the limits of human knowledge, and the enduring fascination of what lies beneath. Folklore has preserved the echo of fear, while science has illuminated some corners of understanding. Together, they tell a story of humanity's engagement with the vast, mysterious, and awe-inspiring ocean, a story that continues to unfold with every wave, every discovery, and every glance into the deep, unknown waters that stretch beyond the horizon. Since the earliest days of human seafaring, the ocean has inspired a mixture of awe, fear, and profound curiosity. Its vast surface stretches endlessly, reflecting shifting hues of blue, gray, and silver, while beneath lies a hidden world largely inaccessible to human eyes. Every ripple, shadow, and unusual wave was once a potential source of fear. Every unexplained sound or movement beneath the water could give rise to stories of enormous serpents, monstrous creatures, or beings beyond imagination. These early accounts were grounded in genuine observation. Sailors in coastal communities encountered whales, giant squids, strange fish, and unanticipated weather phenomena. To people with limited scientific understanding, the immense and mysterious ocean naturally gave rise to legends. Over time, as science progressed, these once feared monsters transformed into figures of folklore. Even with modern understanding, the ocean remains largely unexplored, holding secrets that defy prediction, inspire imagination, and remind humanity of its smallness in the face of the unknown. In the earliest records, sea monsters were described with a combination of vivid detail and striking exaggeration. Ancient maps depicted coiled serpents at the edges of known waters, marking places where navigation was uncertain, where the familiar ended and the terrifying began. These creatures were sometimes portrayed as enormous, multi-headed or armored, capable of sinking entire ships with a single movement. Such accounts were not mere inventions. Sailors had observed strange phenomena, the sudden appearance of massive whales, unusual floating objects mistaken for creatures, or patterns in the waves and currents that seemed unnatural. These encounters, filtered through the lens of cultural belief and limited knowledge, became stories of leviathans, krakens, and serpents of the deep. Fear and imagination intertwined, giving shape to creatures whose size and power mirrored the overwhelming vastness of the oceans themselves. As seafaring expanded and voyages became longer and more frequent, reports of sea monsters multiplied. Navigators crossing oceans encountered phenomena that were unfamiliar, mysterious, and often terrifying. Tales circulated among sailors, sudden currents that seemed alive, massive shadows beneath the hull, waves that moved against the wind, and creatures that rose and disappeared as if intelligent. These stories were shared with caution, whispered in port towns or recorded in ship logs. Sailors described creatures as long, coiling, and immense, sometimes following vessels for days, and sometimes appearing only briefly before vanishing beneath the surface. Repeated encounters, consistent descriptions, and the authority of experienced seafarers lent credibility to these accounts. To the untrained eye, they might have seemed mythical, but for those who lived on the water, they were real, urgent, and worthy of careful attention. Eyewitness accounts from northern waters, particularly around Scandinavia and the North Atlantic, often described coiling, serpentine creatures surfacing alongside ships. One captain recounted first noticing a ripple that seemed unusual against the current and wind. Initially, he assumed it might be a floating log, a large school of fish, or a trick of sunlight, but the shape persisted. Slowly, a massive body emerged, glistening in the pale northern sunlight. Its coils moved rhythmically, displacing waves that could be felt through the ship's hull. The crew observed in hushed awe, noting every undulation and even glimpsing eyes that reflected the light. The creature remained visible for hours, finally submerging and leaving only ripples and a subtle change in the water's flow. The crew, all trained and skeptical, unanimously confirmed the sighting in their logs, emphasizing that it was not a tale told for effect, but a careful, first-hand observation. Tropical seas, sailors and traders reported similarly astonishing encounters. They described long, undulating forms moving just beneath the surface, with flashes of scales or fins glinting in sunlight. Some noted that these creatures interacted with the currents, creating eddies and ripples that spread over great distances. Schools of fish and flocks of seabirds often reacted to their presence, scattering or altering course in ways that suggested the influence of a massive, intelligent being. Witnesses emphasized that these creatures moved deliberately, sometimes matching the speed of the ship, sometimes retreating, yet always maintaining a sense of controlled, conscious motion. Observers interpreted this as evidence of intelligence or instinct beyond that of ordinary marine animals. As observation improved, scholars and naturalists began to document these sightings with increasing detail. From the Renaissance through the Enlightenment, explorers traveled the oceans with an eye for discovery, classification, and explanation. They observed enormous squids, strange fish, and whales of unimaginable size, noting every detail with care. Their findings were published in journals, sparking curiosity and sometimes controversy as they challenged centuries-old myths. In some cases, confirmation of giant creatures validated earlier accounts. In others, careful observation demystified the monstrous. The result was a nuanced understanding. The ocean was home to strange and powerful life, but it was not governed by the fantastical horrors imagined by earlier generations. The monsters had not vanished. They had simply been reframed, integrated into the realm of natural history and folklore. Despite the progress of science, fear never entirely disappeared. The ocean is vast, deep, and largely unexplored. Even with modern technology, much of the world's seas remain hidden, shrouded in darkness and mystery. Deep-sea trenches, unexplored ridges, and inaccessible currents continue to harbor life forms unknown to science. Submersibles and deep-sea cameras occasionally capture creatures that appear fantastical, echoing the monsters of old. Sightings of oarfish, giant squids, and enormous jellyfish evoke the same sense of awe and caution that inspired sailors centuries ago. The ocean's inaccessibility preserves the possibility that some legends were rooted in reality, and that fear, once a survival mechanism, has become a cultural memory, a testament to human imagination in the face of the unknown. Folklore preserved lessons about respect. Tales of monsters often carried warnings: avoid certain waters, be cautious during storms, and respect the rhythms of the ocean. While science explained many phenomena, the symbolic value of these stories endured. Monsters represented the unpredictable, the uncontrollable, and the overwhelming power of nature. Even as literal belief in these creatures declined, their metaphorical presence continued to teach about dangers and the beauty of the sea. Fear had become a tool of cultural memory, encoded in stories that entertained and instructed, while imagination kept the unknown alive. Artists, writers, and storytellers contributed to this evolution. Paintings depicted enormous serpents or krakens entangled with ships. Engravings illustrated massive creatures rising from the depths. Literature explored encounters with the unknown. These artistic interpretations emphasized drama, scale, and the sublime, capturing both terror and fascination. By placing monsters in imaginative, symbolic contexts, culture allowed fear to transform into wonder. The ocean remained a place of mystery, but the monsters became a reflection of human curiosity, creativity, and the enduring sense that the world is larger than we can fully perceive. The psychological dimension of these stories is profound. Fear is a fundamental human response, shaped by survival instincts and environmental uncertainty. At sea, where isolation, danger, and vastness converge, fear is amplified. Sea monsters embodied this fear, providing tangible form to intangible anxieties. As understanding increased, fear became less immediate, but it did not vanish. Instead, it was encoded into narrative, preserved as folklore, legend, and metaphor. Tales of krakens, leviathans, and serpents became repositories of collective memory, maintaining the emotional resonance of the unknown while integrating it into culture, art, and education. The interplay of observation and imagination also played a critical role. Early sailors combined careful observation with storytelling, creating narratives that were part report, part legend. Even as science clarified many aspects of marine life, the imaginative layer remained, giving depth, drama, and cultural significance to encounters with the unknown. Folklore became a way of engaging with both what is known and what remains mysterious, preserving the awe, respect, and wonder inspired by the ocean's vastness. The persistence of folklore demonstrates humanity's need to narrativize the unknown. Stories of monsters provide a framework for understanding the ocean's unpredictability and power. They remind humans of their vulnerability, the limits of perception, and the importance of humility. Even as fear diminishes, imagination continues to animate the depths, keeping alive the sense that the ocean is a realm of wonders, surprises, and perhaps creatures yet to be discovered. These tales became part of maritime culture, teaching lessons that were both practical and symbolic, and creating a shared understanding of the sea's mysteries. Modern discoveries reinforce the enduring relevance of these stories. Deep-sea exploration continues to reveal species previously unknown, some of astonishing size and form. The ocean's complexity, from its microbiomes to abyssal plains, remains largely unmapped. Each discovery invites reflection on the creatures once feared, the legends that arose, and the thin line between observation and imagination. In this way, folklore preserves the echo of fear, even as science illuminates the unknown. The monsters of old exist in memory, imagination, and occasionally in glimpses of reality yet to be fully explained. The evolution from fear to folklore also reflects cultural adaptation. Societies incorporated these tales into rituals, art, literature, and navigation practices. Sailors were instructed on safe routes. Early cartographers included cautionary sketches, and coastal communities used stories as cautionary guides. Monsters served not only as entertainment, but as practical lessons for survival. Science later clarified the nature of many phenomena, yet the symbolic power of monsters persisted, ensuring that fear was transformed into respect, storytelling, and cultural memory. Even today, the ocean's mysteries remain. Explorers, divers, and scientists encounter life that challenges expectations, forms that surprise, and phenomena that cannot be fully explained. In these moments, the monsters of old seem not entirely imaginary. They persist as reminders of the ocean's power, the limits of human knowledge, and the enduring fascination of what lies beneath. Folklore has preserved the echo of fear, while science has illuminated corners of understanding. Together, they tell the story of humanity's engagement with the vast, mysterious, and awe-inspiring ocean. A story that continues to unfold with every wave, every discovery, and every glance into the deep, unknown waters that stretch beyond the horizon. Ultimately, the transformation from fear to folklore is not a disappearance but a reframing. Monsters became symbols, metaphors, and imaginative companions. They remind us that while science can explain much, the ocean still harbors unknowns, secrets that challenge understanding, and creatures that may exist beyond our perception. Folklore preserves both the thrill of fear and the wonder of curiosity, ensuring that the mysteries of the ocean remain alive in human consciousness. The creatures of the past, once feared and now legendary, continue to inspire, caution, and captivate, embodying the enduring relationship between humanity and the vast, untamed waters of the world. Even now, when waves ripple gently across the sea and sunlight dances on the surface, one can imagine enormous forms moving beneath, shaping currents and influencing life in ways unseen. The monsters of old may no longer strike terror in sailors' hearts, but they endure in stories, in imagination, and in the lingering awareness that the ocean, vast and largely unexplored, still holds its secrets. Fear has become folklore, but wonder persists, bridging the gap between what we know and what we have yet to discover.